Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining the webinar, Introduction to Design Thinking Bootcamp by QGLUE Consulting Partner and Practice Head David P. Isaac. Before we begin, I would like to introduce QAI. QAI is a transitional consulting and workforce development organization addressing operational excellence in knowledge-intensive service organizations. With a legacy built over 30 years and counting, QAI evangelizes process improvement, operational excellence, and quality in India and globally by equipping organizations through deployment of best practices and processes. Further, introducing QGLUE. QGLUE is a design and innovation venture of QAI. QGLUE uses design and design-led approaches to help businesses build services that people love and impact the world around. Using human-centered approach with robust methodology, QGLUE equips people to solve wicked problems by helping them reach a solution that is just not right but also desirable. Moving ahead, I would also like to introduce the facilitator for this webinar, David P. Isaac. David P. Isaac comes over with over 24 years of extensive experience designing processes and business process improvement to enhance customer and stakeholder experiences. David is currently consulting organizations for business transformation using a blend of design thinking, innovation triz, and design for Six Sigma. He has consulted and trained more than 40 organizations in India and abroad using the design thinker's creative mindset to design innovative solutions, transforming processes and user experience. He is a certified design thinker from MIT Sloan and has conducted design thinking trainings and coaching for multiple organizations such as Microsoft, Aon Hewitt, Airtel, Prudential, First Data, SLK Software, etc. He is also certified as a TRIZ Level 3 practitioner issued by the University of Twente. David's specialty lies in combining the power of design thinking methodology with TRIZ innovation tools to help achieve better and more specific solutions to real-world wicked problems. I would like to hand over the session to David so you may all get started on your design journey. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Arnav, for introduction onto QAI, this thing QGLUE, and welcome participants to a quick overview onto our design thinking bootcamp. And what we will be doing in our session is we will have a look at what is there to offer during the bootcamp, a quick overview on design thinking and what it encompasses, and then maybe have a question answer kind of a session. Just to reconfirm, I am just activating your mics. So the way that we will be communicating in our webinar is you can type your questions into your chat session window. If you have any questions, doubts, clarifications, and I will keep on addressing them as we go along. Just to check, are you able to hear our voice clearly? Hear our voice, Arnav, and my voice clearly here at the moment? You can just reply and type on the window, chat session window. I'm also temporarily activating your mics, so you can maybe some disturbances will be there, so I'll mute some of your mics, but it is better that we actually communicate onto the chat window. Okay, great. So so we will begin our session with really understanding why do we need to have something like design thinking really coming in, and why are organizations suddenly have a lot of this interest towards design thinking, and what is this all about. So it's like a precursor to the if you are wanting to really understand what design thinking is, and whether you want to join the bootcamp, then this will be a good kind of a launchpad for you to really address some of your queries. So if you look at why design thinking, why do we need design thinking? you have a lot of data around what is working and not working. So if you look at a lot of new products, new services that we introduce, changes that we do, typically 75% of them fail. And therefore a lot of research into why this kind of real failure is happening. And many times what really happens is we are looking at only two perspectives of our new product, new services, and any modification transformation that we want to do. The one is from a business perspective, from a ROI perspective, or from a financial feasibility perspective, or a business value perspective, from a strategy perspective, which is more so from business oriented. The second angle we look at is more from technology, seeing is it feasible technologically to integrate, is it feasible to provide certain digital platform, or is it feasible to roll out a certain change. But the third circle that we see here is something that is missing, and therefore the 75% failure rate is we never go back and validate and really come from an outside in perspective and really see whether the user has certain value to what you're trying to really offer. So you are changing the process, or introducing a new product or a system, but what is the value add, what is the value perceived by the end user, by the end stakeholder, is something that we really miss out. So design thinking per se is a confluence of these three elements of business, technology, and the user value. So therefore many of you would have heard the statement of design thinking being more human centered. So when you say human centered, it's more so from an end user, it's more so from stakeholder, and it's also more so from the stakeholder groups. But it's all got to do with what is the perceived value, or the need, or the inherent need that is really existing. So this is where design thinking really comes in. And a lot of interest, if you see here some of the slides here with the data, is a lot of organizations have surveyed and done analysis, and indicated that a lot of high interest is seen in executives. Some Accenture study here indicating that 81% of executives surveyed looked at personal experiences, which is becoming their top priority. um, uh, and also a lot of acquisition happening in the design thinking space, with large corporates also entering into organizations looking at user experience, and design thinking, and digital confluence with design thinking elements. We see organizations like SAP and others, and there is a lot of other research that has got done, which indicates that there is a significant difference in the profitability of organizations who are into design thinking in terms of coming up with new products and processes, and compared to others. So you see a lot of this difference through also articulated through research. And again, as we know, a lot of, and we keep on speaking in our organizations again, is in terms of customer satisfaction, net promoter score, and focus on user experience is something that continuously keeps on laying our attention. So what's really different in design thinking? So usually what separates out design thinking is its focus on the human element, the element of empathy, looking at an outside in perspective. But remember, design thinking does not mean that we don't do the things that we are doing currently. For example, data analysis, data analytics, insight gathering, process mapping. Maybe you're already doing Lean and Six Sigma. Design thinking adds on into these methodologies which are currently existing, and leverages the third element of the human empathy perspective into it. So we continuously articulate our current methods, but focus towards the human element. Also very imperative from a design thinking perspective, very similar to agile practices, is the phenomenon of failing fast. That means you prototype and test your concepts, solutions, so that you get quick feedback, and are able to have a very high success rate when you are finally deploying a particular change or a process. So you see very structured kind of a method in terms of coming up with design thinking methodologies. And a lot of organizations, corporates have really focused on design thinking in recent times. When I say recent, in the past 2 years, 3 years, you see a lot of this that they have come up publicly. Now remember that there could be practices which organizations already do, which they may not want to have been advertised in the public space, but the journey would have started much earlier. You see here Pepsi here looking at how do we come up with offerings which would really address a certain need of a certain criteria in terms of and even there are examples in Pepsi. If you would have looked at how does the sound of the chip, when you eat the chips, the sound that it makes, what is it that really appeals? Is it a crunchy flavor or not? So you may say that this lot of insights really come in from your market research and data sets and other elements, but they are subsets of a much wider perspective wherein you start empathizing with what are specific needs of your target stakeholders. You have Pepsi being involved heavily. Here's an example of Infosys, which has gone ahead and trained around 1,70,000 odd employees into design thinking methodologies to inculcate the perspective of not only technology, but technology empowering a value element for the end stakeholders. Is not only your client, but if your client is in a certain space, what do they really want, and therefore how can we really modify our processes and systems? For example, many of the IT service providers provide support and infrastructure support, networking, and upgrades onto very critical softwares that they are using. So you may define something as a incident resolution time or an SLA, which is on paper, and have the gold and the platinum service levels that you articulate. But what is it that the end customer or end user wants? So if your end user is typically somebody who is in an oil rig, now for him, on an oil rig where he's the cost of oil discovery and equipment and all run by the hour and by the minute kind of leasing charges that really happen, your 2 day or 1 day or maybe a 4 hour SLA also sometimes become very, very catastrophic. So it starts relooking at your current way of engaging in a very new light in terms of discovering and insights. You have also Ford, who is also involved into design thinking practices for designing future of mobility. How do we really transform the business, because they see that certain value add and certain competencies that you hold in your current businesses themselves may actually work against you at a certain moment of time. So there is a need for you to reinvent yourself, and the way to do it is to involve a wide audience and start looking at things from an outside in perspective, and to come up with multiple such kind of skills elements. And we see that even the economic forum talks about the importance of people to be innovative and creative element rising over period of the years. In the coming years, much more higher need from that compared to a much logical and an analytical kind of a mind. So you see a lot of these organizations are investing very, very heavily into design thinking, and therefore you see that really brings us to the point on what design thinking really is, and what does it really encompass, and what does it really do very differently. Any questions still here? I'll just take a break just to check on any questions which you would be having. Just type your questions on your chat session window and I'll just access them, and we could uh, I could really respond to some of your questions. Any questions still here? Okay, great. Okay, thanks. Thank you so much. So we will move towards the what on design thinking, and what does it really embody, and what does it really do? What is design thinking per se? So design thinking is nothing, so the interest in design thinking would have been here for the past 5 years, 6 years, where we see in the public space. But design thinking as a science evolved in the early 1970s, 1965, 1970, wherein along with artificial intelligence as a concept or as a phenomenon, you would also see a lot of research being done on trying to really understand patterns of human behavior and trying to articulate the element of what is creativity and how can we decipher creativity, and we decipher the human behavior into certain kind of requirements, and having understood that, can we create something in line with it. So the science of design thinking origins way back in the 1960s, 1970s, and later on, as we know, IDEO and other organizations, and as they adopted it, became it has come into the limelight. So if you look at this, what is design thinking? So design thinking is not about solving design problems, but it is solving business problems with a design process. So the key word is the business problem. So we are looking at business problems. So it's not a designer problem, but it's a business problem. But we are solving business problems from a design process rather than the traditional approach. For example, many times we talk about increasing sales of our products or services or entering into the new market, which is a business problem. Now, how do we address it as a designer? We may have addressed it as a strategic intent, as various logic trees or balanced scorecard, and which is all very analytical in nature. How do we go ahead and create something new as a fuzzy approach? So the essence is to use fuzziness of design thinking and apply them into business problems to create something innovative. So usually in the business thinking, we have a problem set and there is a certain solution that you would move towards in the business element. But in design thinking, what is very important is to understand the context behind certain behavioral patterns of problems that we really define. And once we get that context right, and when I say context, meaning the scenario in which certain stakeholders are using certain equipments or aligning them to, or the conditions which in which the business is really aligned to, or what are the stakeholders trying to really come up and do with their businesses, is something that we need to really understand as a context. And this understanding of the context is from a human background, from a stakeholder background, and therefore it brings in a lot of insight. So you will see in the design thinking methodology on the right hand side, the problem statement, you may get another set of problem statements which come from that insight of the understanding of the context, and therefore you not only generate one solution, but you get multiple sets of solutions that you could be really looking at, which you would not have got from the original methodology. So this is something that really differentiates between our normal way of thinking versus a designer's way of thinking. So it's to as a design thinking, as a designer, we are looking at a much larger scope per se. So it's not only when you're not talking about design of a chair or of an equipment, but it's on a wider system kind of a thinking element. It's like it's not only a chair, but it's the room in the house and the house in the environment. And you see that everything is in terms of the context, and therefore when you get the context right, we are able to design processes and systems which are very, very appropriate and gives a lot of insights. And how do we do design thinking? What's the mechanics of doing design thinking? Now, per se, design thinking itself is very fuzzy, but for us to at least have a view on design thinking, here is a good slide that talks about, and of course, you will see a lot of literature that talks about multiple phases or steps or stages within the design thinking approach. Now, here is a four-phase kind of an approach on design thinking, which essentially talks about discovery, define, develop, and deliver. Now, if you look at this, is like a double diamond framework phenomenon, wherein in the discover phase, the focus is on identifying the key stakeholders empathizing with the stakeholders, observing and questioning the stakeholders, and really to infer what are the key drivers and the specific needs of these stakeholders from a business perspective, from an individual perspective, and from a perspective of processes and systems that surround them. Now, here you will see that it diverges out. So there's a divergent phase here. And as you diverge out, you get a lot of insights and understanding into things that you would not have seen earlier. So essentially, this entire phase is a divergent, and then it converges into the define phase where we talk about the how might we statement. HMW statement is what is that specific problem that you would want to define. So your problem now gets converted into a very specific formula based kind of a statement that makes it very precise for you to ideate. So you'll see the first phase on the left hand side is the designing the right thing element. The focus is on the designing the right thing. What are you really focused on? The insights that you are gathering. Now the second divergent phase occurs when you have the problem's definition and you are trying to now ideate. And when I mean ideate is you are trying to come up with different innovative creative solutions for your problem statement, and you move out with your multiple ideas, solutions that you have come, and slowly you would try and then merge inwards in terms of defining, refining your ideas, shortlisting some of your ideas, maybe collating them into a solution set, and then moving towards identifying the concept and the to be kind of a situation which you would want to take up for prototyping. Now here the design thinking process does not end here, because as a journey in say a boot camp or a program, this is certain element of skill that we can deliver here. But this divergent and convergent phases also move ahead. Is after you have done the prototype, you would definitely, when you want to make it a practical solution, you will have to translate this prototype into a pilot, analyze, and also analyze the financial benefits that you would get, maybe do some detailed testing of the market for you to really come to a solid conclusion that some of these concepts that you have designed and prototyped are actually something that you would work. And many times as a designer, you would really come back to the drawing board with a new set of inferences and then again move up. So you will see a lot of the phases of design thinking is of a fuzzy nature. Now, for an analytical mind, this becomes really difficult, because an analytical mind will state that this is something like a rework. So if I have done the empathy okay and defined the how might be okay, then why should I ever come back after I've done some concept or I've defined a problem to come back and again question the findings that I have made already in my studies or in the earlier journey? It's a rework. Now remember, as a designer, this is the process itself. That fuzziness of going back and forth is something that is going to is in the nature of the designer, and this is something that we will try and really experience in our boot camp that we have planned, wherein the participants would we would go through these four phases of the design thinking path. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, it does not end here. There is another extension of this, because it's a long journey before you can even get it in the practical state. But this is something that you can experience in a boot camp, and that's our attempt. So what we are expecting is, participants in the boot camp, if you have already registered onto the boot camp, and we would recommend in many of our workshops we do that. In fact, all of our workshops of design thinking is that you come up with a list of practical problems that you want to solve within your organization. Because it's what we do in the boot camp is we will split ourselves into groups, and then each group is working on a certain problem statement and a problem area, and we keep on experimenting with it as we go along, and that gives you a good feel and a sense of what the entire process is. So it will be a great idea if we can shortlist and get it inside the classroom and in our session, and then we can shortlist maybe some of the problem statements that a team would want to work, and that becomes a very good kind of experimentation zone where you can try this out, kind of. So this is the overall path of design thinking, and you see on the left hand side the design for the right thing, and on the right hand side is more focus on designing the things right in terms of failing fast, developing quick concepts, quick feedbacks, redesigning it back onto the drawing board. And this is exactly what the entire journey looks like. So you have the problem space and you have the solution space. Any questions still here that you would want to really pose? Questions? Yes, Vinita, we will be sharing a recording of this session with you post the webinar as a link, so you can access some of these webinars. In fact, if you also go to our QGLUE website, you will see a lot of videos and past webinars that we have posted, where you can share it with your colleagues, and you can also have a look. It gives a lot of insights into different other offerings that we have from QGLUE for design thinking. Yeah, so question from Hemant is, I guess this also requires collaboration with more than one individual. How can it be done as an individual? Okay, so Hemant, the design thinking approach requires a group of people from maybe different teams. So when you do it practically in an organization, you would have cross-functional team members coming together. But when I say cross-functional, they are all related to the problem at hand. Say, for example, you are looking at how do I transform our new joinee experience when people join the organization. Now, in this kind of a problem, you may want to have the person who interviews, and the person who the OD person and the HR person and the IT person representing the group. So essentially, design thinking is very effective when you have a cross-functional team working on a set of problem that you have defined. Now, that does not mean that there is no role for an individual. In fact, if you look at the design thinking methodology, the individual role is also very critical. Because here, like for example, let me give an example here, is say in the discover phase, you are trying to meet up with stakeholders and understand what are their intent and do observations in the field, or go and see what is really happening. So say for example, you are trying to redesign the onboarding process or improve the turnaround time or the new journey experience. As a team, you cannot do the observation as a team. The observations and the questioning has to be done by the individual. So an individual, as a group, you may frame questions on what you would want to go and check up with the new joinee, or when you go and into the classroom where new joinees are undergoing some training and orientation, of what will you go and observe. But ultimately, that observation and questioning has to be done by an individual, and therefore once that individual activity is done, individuals again come back into a group to share what they saw essentially, and what they inferred from their activities of discover. And that is where you see a lot of back and forth movement, because there's no only one time right. So the point is, an individual has a very critical role to play, but it's an individual role, and at certain stages a role of the group. One another very critical area is the ideation phase, wherein you create ideas. Now, many times we are under the perspective that when we do the brainstorming as a group, we will definitely get brilliant ideas. Now, that has been disproved over a period of time. Is what is very critical is in the brainstorming that we really forget is, first the individual has to brainstorm at an individual level onto the solutions. Only then can the group activity begin. But I see many teams in various group activities of brainstorming just come together and start discussing about solutions, and feel that a group discussion and a group convincing or an argument or a certain kind of sharing itself is going to create new ideas. But that is totally flawed, because a new ideas essentially gets created at an individual level first. And this is also validated by a lot of literature, especially if you read Edward de Bono's books, where he talks about individual creativity and group creativity and the process and the science of creativity. You will see the role of an individual is the pivotal role. So for both you would have so the design thinking journey embodies both aspects, the group as well as the individual. Okay, I'm just going through some of the other questions, and as we address, so Ria is mentioning, as you mentioned, the design thinking process leads you to a variety of insights. In regards to the design the right thing, how do you identify the direction to take? Okay, and uh, and let us look. Okay, so your question, let me just articulate this, Ria, for my understanding is, you are saying that design thinking, yes, design thinking leads to various insights, at least in the discovery phase. That's what we are trying to really infer. In regards to the design the right thing, how do you identify the direction to take? Now, Ria, so this is a very classic kind of an so I would like to introspect on this, and you will realize this of is, how do you know that you are doing the right thing? Say for example, you want to come to insights into a certain problem and you do a certain activity. Can you tell with 95% confidence that this activity is going to generate insights? Now the problem is that for an analytical mind, we would always want to have this 90-95% confidence of a certain journey or a direction to take even before you started the journey. And this is exactly what design thinking really burst from our mindset, from our thinking, is there is a path. There are multiple paths. Now, when we are deriving insights, we are going with a very open mind. Is we are not stating that we know entirely as an expert what the need or the process design is or what the current is we go and check and we go and ask. Now in the asking, as long as we follow a certain guideline which is there in terms of the method of asking and in the methods of articulating it with certain data points and understanding, you have to believe that information. Now there is no questioning on whether it is right or wrong, or whether should I do an interview here, or whether I should do a survey here. Now there are various tools and each tool has its own nuances. But you, as a designer, you would definitely have this fuzziness of back and forth movement, wherein you cannot state with 95% confidence that this is the method and therefore you will always get insights. And many design thinking journeys essentially fail also. But the element is that, can we is there an aptitude for us to experiment with something different, for us to be creative? And this is where design thinking comes in. It does not give you the full confidence. It tells you certain paths, and then as you keep on moving back and forth, you realize that there is a certain insight that comes to you. Okay, but there is no design that how do you identify the direction to take? We don't know the direction, but there are certain paths, and logically you can take multiple paths. But can anybody state that whether taking this path is going to give you an insight? We don't know. Maybe there's no insight at all. Are you with me, Ria? Yeah. So you'll see this kind of a difference, and therefore, for many people, design thinking itself, since it is fuzzy, since it does not have a analytical approach, like for example, like a Six Sigma, where you talk about a define, measure, analyze, improve, control, or many other methodologies which are very, very rigid. There is no milestone for you to really evaluate, and there is this fuzziness. Remember, for our teaching purpose, we created a 4-step approach, or many areas other organizations may talk about a 7-step or a 5-step or a 5-stage or 8-stage kind of methodology of design thinking. But there is no milestone. There is no evaluation at each of the stages, because your output, your success will only be determined by how good is your final product or service that you defined. Nobody is really asking what you did at individual stages, and therefore there's no evaluation at individual stages. Now you see, this is something where design thinking also becomes very, very different from what we really learn or what we have experienced. So it's more of an experiential. Therefore, many places we see design thinking learning by doing. And in our bootcamp also, the entire focus is on doing. And we will give the method, we will show you the technique, we will show you multiple approaches, and then say, here is a problem that you have chosen. Now you take this approach and follow a path, and what do you really find here is something for you to discover in the bootcamp, and that's what we really encourage in the bootcamp. And I think there is a lot of value that you would now really see in that. Yeah. Okay, great, great. Yeah. So so you will the more the learnings actually come in. So you'll see a lot of the bootcamp session and design thinking sessions that we do. There's not much of a focus on the theory, but the understanding a technique, learning the mechanics of the technique, knowing what are the limiting factors of a particular technique, say an empathy map or a customer journey map, and then help you through and through the team to deploy that and see for yourself on what is the value of it, and then reflect on the journey that you took to see, is there certain value that you get by using an empathy map or a customer journey map, on what it actually gives you as an insight, and is that insight residing there. But of course, having said that, for the past organizations that we have worked in, engagements that we have done, if fairly your problem statement is defined properly and you have the right set of people, definitely you would get a certain vector of insights available. Not that exact insight, but at least you know when you go back to your organizations, this is an area for you to investigate. Right. Okay, great. Hemant, coincidentally, we used it for onboarding, and yes, we had a lot of people to discuss with, and I wanted to take it forward to solve business problems. Yes, yes, you can. Yes, you can, Hemant. You can. I completely agree with what you just mentioned in the last few minutes. Yeah. Okay, great. Any other questions other than Hemant, Ria, others would like to ask at this moment? Okay, so we will move forward and we will see what is the design thinker's mindset that we spoke of sometime in our discussions now. For the past few minutes, we were delving. So it's a designer's mindset. So this is something that we need to inculcate. It's there, but we need to rediscover this. One is an element of curiosity, is to ask questions, is to observe like a child, to observe and ask questions. Sometimes be very irritating. Why do we do like this only? Are there alternative ways of doing something? Why is it that this is carried out on the system? Why is it that I have got 5 different systems which are operating? And therefore, the curiosity to know and to discover. That's a key skill. The second is an iterative approach. Short cycles, that means activities being done, deployed, seen, and again back and forth movement. So iterative kind of an approach. Third is a systems thinking approach. Means we are trying to link up multiple elements and trying to figure out the logic in terms of how they are connected. For example, how I'm just taking the simple example of that onboarding example only. So how does the recruitment team feed information to the IT team, and how does IT team communicate these requirements to the backend who will activate the IDs and the access to various systems, and then provide the infrastructure and the seating and the infra team? How does this communicate? What is the role of the technology which is embodied? Is this technology visible to people? So then you now start looking at interactions between people, system, process, technology, teams, and get this entire mesh a little clearer to really understand why have we designed certain things in a certain manner. So the key ethos and thinking is, if we can understand the way the current design is created of a particular system or a business system, then we are able to question and understand the interlinkages, and therefore, like a Rubik's cube, we are able to now interplay this off or suddenly create something very new, which will meet the requirements, but in a much elegant manner. It is less costlier and it is more effective. So you try and meet all of these parameters simultaneously. Similarly, another key quality is of empathy, to understand the other person's point of view, to really so we will look at empathy also in our workshop in detail, what it is and what it is not. But to really understand from other person's point of view, many people talk about putting yourself in others shoes to really find out the experiential elements. Also, as a design thinker, a lot of visualization, you will see a lot of sketching, drawing, usage of post-it notes to make visual, because the whole essence is the more visual you be, you essentially can get feedbacks which are faster. You'll see prototyping also, you get feedback faster, you are able to create something new faster, you are able to experiment with things faster. And instead of you writing down and creating papers, a visual graphic system becomes very easy. Similarly, the storytelling element, sequence of activities, brainstorming, observations, visual thinking, and of course the analytical part of the 5 I and the questioning and the deep questioning of things. These are certain skills of a designer. Also, there are various tools that we will concepts and tools that we will be using, like these are some parts of service blueprint or a customer journey map. So you'll see things like front stage, backstage, a customer journey, some touch points where the service is actually being provided, a visual representation of a blueprint of the entire experiential element of the stakeholder, and the channel, the medium in which interactions are really happening. So you'll see a lot of these terminology and concepts, the ecosystem, scenarios, opportunity spaces, and actors, essentially people who are participating in this entire customer service delivery. So you see a lot of these concepts in our bootcamp will get explained, but we are not delving, as I mentioned, not delving too much into the theory, but the objective is to get the essence, take a practical problem as a group, run this through, experience it, then critique it, and then see the value, and then have something moving off. Right. And I'll just take you now through the content of our 2 days design thinking bootcamp, for you to have a, bird's eye view on what is the content, and then you can question, you can ask some questions, doubts that you would have. So it's an interactive workshop that we'll be having. And what each so we will have a lot of these video short clips which are there, a lot of group activities which are involved. Each group will be provided a kit where you can prototype, use for prototyping, chart papers. You will have a manual along with you. All the slides that we will use in the training will be shared with you in the printed format, so that you can write your notes that you would have. So it's more of doing and learning kind of exercise. The various modules which are embodied in the 2 days bootcamp are: first we will look at the importance of design thinking, and then some case studies of applications of design thinking. Look at how do we write the problem statement, and how do we articulate it using current data, current experiences, information that you have. Then we are in the discover phase, wherein we start understanding who the stakeholders and users are. So we'll do simulations on using what is known as stakeholder analysis, and we will look at tools like interrelationship diagrams or problem perception mapping, so that we are able to identify the stakeholders and the problem very clearly. And then get into the discover phase itself, things like persona mapping, stakeholder personas, creating empathy maps, and using these tools not only in standalone but in tandem, because the power of the techniques, methodologies, is there in the tandem usage of them at a respective place. So we'll see in our activities on how they can be really joined up together. And we also look at the customer journey mapping, the technique of customer journey mapping. The entire workshop is actually based on a very simple principle: is um, uh, first go through the theory and an overview of the technique. Then the facilitator will explain to the group certain examples and how to go about, say, for example, we take an example of an empathy map. So you first understand what an empathy map is. What are the limiting factors? What does it do? What it does not do? And then an example of how to go ahead with the creating of an empathy map in real time with an example. And then have the third piece is have the group individually working on using that particular technique to the problem at hand, so that you are able to experience. And then the fourth, which is final, is the group can then share it with other groups in terms of what were their experiences and findings by using certain approach, and therefore does that really help you. So essentially the flow goes through these paths all along. And we will look at how to use the how might we statement and frame the how might we statement. And when we come to the ideation phase, here is something interesting. Here is you will see that we will deal with certain techniques like idea blitz. How do we get ideas very fast? A focused brainstorming approach using 735 technique. Then we'll look at innovation probes. How do we get ideas which are innovative? Just brainstorming will not do the work. And therefore we look at innovation probes and ideation tools and techniques using a technique known as TRIS. You see here on serial number 7 is we will focus some introduction to the TRIS approach on coming up with innovative ideas and solution sets. So some brief introduction and application of them to our solution sets. And then as a group, you will move into concept development, into new customer journey mapping, and creating prototypes. And finally the groups would present their prototypes to other groups and for the facilitator and get feedback onto their solution set. So that would really complete the entire 2 days boot camp. Any questions here that the team wishes to ask? Any questions? Okay, so I will show you one slide which talks about the various boot camps that we have planned. We have boot camps lined up in Mumbai, Pune, Bangalore, and Delhi. Just nearing to the end of our session, I will just show you one slide that will talk about our boot camps. You can also visit our QGLUE site, and you will see a lot of information there. But I'll share an email ID and the date so that you can immediately, uh, uh, you know. Immediately want to get more information, you can get information, you can write up. We will, after this bootcamp, also share along with you, send along the webinar recorded session, so you can also with our links where you can come back if you're interested in some of the sessions and like to share it with some of your friends. You're welcome. um, okay, great. Any other questions? Okay, 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 great. Okay. So this is the brief on the 2 days boot camp that we will have. At QGLUE, what we have also realized is, and which is part of our bootcamp program, and that's a consolidated offering that we have. And it's voluntary now, because what we have is we offer you a 30 days support for you to be doing a design thinking project for a live engagement in your organization. So the essence is like a just do it kind of a phenomenon, wherein we will share the details during the workshop, during our boot camp, where you can form groups, and it's voluntary. It's nothing that we force anything, but it's voluntary. But we would encourage you to really do this. Is you can form groups say within your organization, or maybe 2-3 people in different organizations can come together, and we have a common we have a base camp. We use base camp for our communication, group communication, wherein uh, we will share with you certain roadmap on how you can go ahead and translate certain learnings in your project areas, and have a 4-stage approach, wherein after every stage a facilitator from QGLUE will have a call with you to guide you, take inputs from you, and really understand your problem and help you with maybe deploying, not maybe not the entire design thinking approach, but you may find certain tools and techniques very useful, and you want to experiment with it in your organization, and you may undergo this kind of a 30-day or slightly longer than that, which is like a 6 weeks or 8 weeks kind of a session, wherein after every 2 weeks we have a call where a facilitator will come handhold you. There are templates that we will also share during the bootcamp, some reading material, links to videos. Sorry. So you can use all of these templates for you to work with real time problems. We see that there is a lot of value in, so our objective in QGLUE is not only to train people in design thinking, but to also support people to and participants to go back to organizations and deploy certain learnings and see for yourself and experience it in your own setup with a certain kind of I'm not saying it will be transformational, but you can actually experiment and see, and then when you see the value you can further maybe evangelize it within the organization. But this is an offering as part of the boot camp, and it's purely voluntary, but we will have more information during the boot camp that I will be sharing, that we'll be sharing with you during the boot camp. But I would encourage all of you to maybe first come with problem statements for the bootcamp, and then subsequently look at other problem statements that you may want to take up for your individual organization. Some case studies here. I would just maybe we have another 7-8 minutes here. Quickly, I'll take you through some case studies on how design thinking has been applied for very specific problems, and so in some cases I cannot reveal to you the organization's names and others, but and you will get a sense of what it would really encompass. So this case study is for a large payments card processing firm, and the problem statement that they started off. So if you look at it's part of a 4-phase, also 3-phase approach that essentially we have tried to call it: discover, ideate, and co-create only. Of course, the second part of practicality and others we are leaving out because of the NDAs and others. But so here is an organization that is saying that so they are essentially a cards payment processing firm. So whenever you swipe your card, there's always this paper slip that you get, which is an acknowledgement of the transaction happening. Now, what problem they were facing is there is usually merchants are complaining about shortage of this paper, and because this paper is not delivered on time, or there is shortage of this paper, then merchants are not ready to swipe that card on this company's machine. They go to the competitor's machine and swipe the card because their objective is to service the customers faster, and this is exactly where this organization is losing money. So they started off with the problem is, how do we reduce the cost of this paper being serviced, and how do we ensure merchants will always get this paper on time? That was the original problem. Now when they went into the exercise of the boot camp and the subsequent journeys that they undertook, and when they did the empathy map and how might we statement and the customer journey mapping, and when they spoke to the merchants and went to the field, they realized that the problem was not only the paper shortage. The problem was merchants were also storing this paper for a long period of time as a justification that something has happened. So somebody may come up with a query or a complaint that a transaction failed, and this paper slip was becoming some kind of a evidence that the transaction did happen. So it was more of a record keeping, but it was very laborious, because imagine merchants are also having to keep the paper with them and store it with them, and that was causing the problem. So the how might we statement was not only the paper, but the statement now became how to create a seamless experience for the merchants. And then the team started ideating and created ideas using 735 technique and multi-screen diagram and some of the other techniques that we will learn. And they developed certain concepts, ideas that they really came up with. And what they really came up with is a thought process, and something that they are working and developing now is how do we have a paperless. So the requirement of the paper was to validate that the transaction happened. Now if I can give some digital verification, either using mobile phones or email or the software that is available, and if it is there on the mobile phone at any moment of time or accessed by a common email id of the merchant, then this kind of paper need not be stored by the merchant. So there will never be a, because you are not, since you're never using the paper at all, there is no shortfall of paper. You reduce the cost of paper. There is no delivery cost of paper. And every time a transaction happens, there is a digital validated and authenticated information available to the merchant in digital format in a certain system for the merchant to access. Now, this is something that they came up with during the session. And when they started looking at getting feedback, and that's where they are now trying to articulate and bring it to market, some kind of a paperless based kind of an authentication system where I don't require the paper. In fact, globally, you will see this paper kind of system is not existing only. It is only in India that you will have some of these paper slips coming in. But this is something that they really came up with. Another example on similar example on merchant onboarding, which is similar to employees and others who really join in. Also, this is mainly related to the employee onboarding also. New joinee process, and so you have one of the examples here is, how do we reduce the onboarding of new employees into an organization that we were really speaking of. So they started looking at, so here in this engagement there's a lot of use of customer journey maps. And once you are doing design thinking also means that they may have traditional approaches also, like lean coming in, and then you have this human centered approach and specific tools, techniques and interviews, and them being engaged inside. And then what I really realized is that is not only the entire time that is getting elongated that reduces the productivity of the of the people, is also got to do with the brand image, because then people suffer, the organization is suffering brand image because of such delayed kind of times of onboarding of new joinees and the experience that they have. So they created a well knit kind of a process where multiple teams are now coordinating on a certain software, internal software that they developed, where real time visibility is available to various stakeholders at every moment of time. So you'll see a lot of successful implementations of the design thinking offerings which have been deployed across multiple organizations. And it need not be, so many people are of the view that design thinking is good for product only. But there are a lot of organizations who have already deployed design thinking in business processes, in key strategic intent. We see a lot of organizations who are into traditional business are looking at transforming that business and trying to use design thinking to come up with very innovative, creative options for them to build their business. Any questions still here? Any questions, doubts that you would have? I'm just browsing through some of your questions. Okay, so Vinita's question is, what would I have learned by the end of bootcamp? Uh, so by the end of bootcamp, so let me break this. What is the end of bootcamp? The bootcamp essentially is the 2 days workshop and the project or the mini project that you would do after the bootcamp, wherein we are providing support. But let me give an output on the 2 days of the bootcamp, which is instructor led. So at the end of 2 days bootcamp that you would have, which is a classroom based instructor led session, you would get an overview on what design thinking is. You would have seen certain techniques and methods which are used in the design thinking approach at various phases. You would have participated in a group to be experiencing and practically doing or applying the tool for a certain problem area at hand and experiencing it yourself firsthand. And you will also get at the end of the bootcamp certain set of templates, takeaway templates, workbook, and other elements and video links that you can use for you to constantly upgrade yourself in your knowledge base. This is the end of the 2 days. Now the voluntary piece, which is after the 2 days, you can take up in your organization or in a group within the bootcamp group itself. You can form a group, or you can go to the organization and trigger a certain problem area that you want to experiment with the design thinking approach. And in that case, the output post your entire project would be that you would have experienced the approach of design thinking tools and applications in your own organization's problem statement that you have identified. So you will not only identify the approach, the techniques, but the application element. But what I cannot guarantee you is that does it mean that you will always come up with new insights at the end of the 2 days bootcamp? Highly unlikely. But the experience is that many of the groups, when they are fully ingrained in the approach, definitely come up with a lot of insights and new realizations. Okay. For example, let me just quote one example here. In one of the boot camps that we were doing, I remember one of the person was from HR, and the person was really interested in, how do we create women empowerment in an organization? How do we empower women, and how do we get gender equality within an organization at very high positions? Now that was the initial problem statement. Now, when as a group they started articulating into the problem statement, what they realized there is the problem is not how do we empower the women, and the way that we are doing it currently is that we celebrate Women's Day, we give some kind of gifts, and we celebrate certain days. Now, the realization was that the act itself of differentiating a certain day for women itself is discriminatory. Therefore, there has to be something that as an element is not, so the focus here is directed to the other set of people who need to empower, say leadership team members and others, for the gender diversity. So the focus area was in the wrong position, but the actual focus area is not there. The actual focus area is how do we get to ensure gender diversity, is to provide the confidence to women employees within an organization to be fully confident that they can deliver at that particular position. How do we empower? It cannot be done by celebrating Women's Day, say one day a year or maybe every quarter. This is a typical outsourcing of your problem kind of a phenomenon. Okay, another question here. I am working on startup idea. I am not a organization, so still is it beneficial for me, or do you have some criteria eligibility to attend the QGLUE workshop? Here, if you look at, is design thinking is also very appropriate for any organization that is working on a startup, or is a startup, or already they have started a business and wanting to grow. Because if you look at, in the prime premise is the three elements of interface. One, your business idea. Second is to look at whether there is a technology supporting it, and the third, whether there is a human need, or there is an actual need for something to happen. Now, many of the startups itself are failing, and there's a lot of research to back this also. They are failing essentially because you have the technology and you have the business acumen, but there is no need for the particular product or the service existing. And therefore, you would have a brilliant idea and a brilliant product and a business proposition that fails. Essentially, why? Because you don't actually not really understand whether this is an actual need, or whether this meets a certain current need of the business market. And this is exactly where design thinking really fits in. So highly appropriate and highly recommended In fact, there are QGLUE is also involved with TIE and other organizations who work with entrepreneurs, who work with startups, and focus area is also on startups in terms of helping them to gain this insight right upfront and save a lot of their money, time, and effort in growing their own business. So highly recommended even for startups. Excellent. Any other questions, doubts before we close? So we have our boot camp that are lined up. We have boot camps lined up in our following locations here. So we have a boot camp in Mumbai on 24th and 25th, in Pune 31st and 1st, in Delhi on September 14th and 15th, and in Bangalore on 21st and 22nd of September. So please do join, and looking forward to seeing you in these workshops. And we and also looking forward to working with you on your real-time projects post the bootcamp, wherein we can support you, guide you in terms of actual deployment of the learnings in your organization.